So in our previous episodes of the Modern Barn series, we started with sketching a diagram of our concept. Then we ended up modeling our concept in Revit. And then in the second episode, we actually took that concept and we started converting it into a building. So we kind of wrapped the concept into building elements like walls, doors, windows, and so on and so forth. And so now we're at the point where we're going to actually start making some photorealistic renderings in a real-time scene of the project for the presentation to our client. Now I know what you may be thinking. Some architects may not want to create a photorealistic renderings at such an early phase of the project. I actually think a little differently. My opinion on the subject is actually a little different. I believe the tools and technology are there for us to actually produce these high quality visualizations at such an early stage while having the ability to modify them as needed thanks to technology such as real-time rendering. So most clients can't actually read floor plans until you start putting things like chairs and tables and books and trees and people and cars into your scenes. People may not understand the scale of it, the use of the space. They get a feeling for what it is that you're designing in this diagram and this floor plan. So we have a technology. I'm going to be using Twinmotion in this video. We have a technology like Twinmotion where we can quickly generate these high quality renderings and images and also have the ability to change. The example I like to give is when you're watching a show like House Hunters. For some reason, we all love House Hunters on HGTV. Don't know why. Don't know why we like to watch people choose between 3 different houses. But if you look at someone and they walk through a house that has been staged versus a house that has not been staged, there's a reason why people spend so much money staging a home versus a giant empty room. The same thing applies to what you're doing here. By telling the story of how the space is going to be used that you're designing with your client, it helps them really understand the concept, the function, and the scale of the space, and elicits some high quality feedback. In fact, as you'll see, we get such good feedback on this project that it changes quite a bit. So what you're going to see here is actually the development of 2 different options using Twinmotion. As I mentioned in the very first episode, this project started in one design concept in scale, size, everything, and has morphed into a completely, honestly different thing with hints of the original. What you're going to see is me building a Twinmotion scene for the original design and then also updating it for the updated design at the time. So with all that being said, let's jump right into Revit and Twinmotion and let's walk through the process. So here's the Revit file, as you guys saw it in the previous episode. I'm going to use a direct link. Okay, this is Twinmotion 2022 at the time. It's similar to 2023, except now you're in a view button within Revit. But what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a direct link between my Revit project and the Twinmotion project. And what you'll notice is just by refreshing that and synchronizing it, and if you have been under your scene like this before and don't know where your building is, you can click it and press F on the keyboard if you want. But you'll notice here's the house now brought in there. So by using Twinmotion, one of the cool things about it is that you don't have to apply custom textures in Revit if you don't want to. You do have to apply materials, and so that's what I did in Revit. Is I made sure that the material buckets were applied. But now I'm going to apply materials in Twinmotion. Before I do that, I'm going to do a couple lighting settings. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm setting HDRI skies. So the only difference between 2023 and 2022 that you're going to see here is the buttons in Twinmotion are going to be different locations. Most of the functions and the processes that I'm showing you are still the same. So here I am turning on a sky dome, which is basically an HDRI sky. I'm adjusting my exposures. Here I'm going to turn on some vignetting. I'm going to change the increase the contrast and lower the saturation, and then I'm going to assign a filter called line light, which gives a little hint edge. So once I've set up my light settings for my view, now it's time to start applying materials. So even if you applied Revit materials and textures, I still suggest you convert them to Twinmotion materials and textures, mainly because they're going to look better when rendered. What you'll notice here is I'm actually applying the material and then I'm scaling it up a whole bunch. If you've watched any of my more recent videos on Twinmotion, you'll notice that I figured out why that scaling issue is happening. And what you can do is change the little UV mapping to by object. So definitely check out a previous Twinmotion video, which I'll link below for that setting. And here I am, I'm just assigning a whole bunch of different materials. So there's a gravel material, there's a grass material, Apparently I wanted to try a different grass material. Grunge is another setting in Twinmotion that I suggest you use wisely within your materials, but what it does is it adds this kind of dirt effect. And so for things like grass especially, it's extremely valuable because when you have a texture that's spanned across a whole surface, sometimes you can see that repetition even on seamless textures because it's just such a large surface. By adding this grunge feature, and you'll notice when I'm applying all these materials, I'm usually adding grunge quite a bit. It actually helps break up a lot of those large textures. Here I am applying some concrete, again playing with things like reflection, grunge. Notice how the grunge adds just a little something to it. The other thing you'll notice here is I'm actually using materials from the Quixel Megascan library. This was one of those things I really wanted to test out some of the higher end materials within this and essentially use pretty much all Quixel Megascan materials for this particular project. And you can see they've got some really, really nice materials. Here's a wood plank. Another thing that you have is something called parallax, which sort of takes the bump map to another level and sort of lets you extrude surfaces. So things like stone and even wood planks, if you add enough of it but not too much, it can actually make those materials look even more three-dimensional than they actually are. Now I'm going to start applying a material to the outside of the building. You'll see I kind of started with a vertical wood / metal that I was trying to get to, and started playing with some different ideas. I actually go back and modify this material in a minute, but now I'm going to add some nice black metal to the mullions and all the window trim. Again, just playing with the amount of reflection, the amount of the scale of everything, trying to make it look as realistic as possible. And here I am, I'm going to change this lean-to be a corrugated metal look to it. So yes, you could model the corrugated metal, but for most cases, just applying the right material looks good in from a distance, depending on the thickness of it. It's also a lot lighter on your Revit model. Just changing the rotation, I'll change the scale, probably add some grunge, maybe a little more reflection to it, and make it really look like some rusty corrugated metal. So as I mentioned in the intro of this video, kind of while I'm doing this corrugated, the design scheme initially, when I was approached by this client, was they really wanted this sort of Scandinavian modern house / barn looking thing, and they sent me some inspirational images that look very similar to this. We have that house shape with all glass deck moving out to it and so on and so forth. And what you'll see is it kind of grew into more of a traditional modern barn look as we modified the design. But this initial scheme was based off of the information I had at the time, which was what they initially wanted, which was sort of a Scandinavian modern barn, sleek, small, single story, all that good stuff. This was an important stone wall that the driveway went along. It kind of marked the property line. So I wanted to make sure, just in case it was in the scene, that we had a nice material applied to it. Again, you could see me adding grunge to this. You could see me adding, playing with the parallax a little bit to get it a little more depth to it. I actually don't think at the end of the day that stone wall ended up in any of the actual images, but I did use the real-time scene quite a bit. Adding a little gray to the existing house. Now, last but not least, I was not happy with that vertical siding, so I went through and I tried to find a much better looking vertical siding to what I wanted. So I found this really nice wood plank texture, scale it up a little bit so that they're nice, bigger, maybe 6 to 8 inch pieces, darken it, and then add a bunch of reflection. Now you can see it's kind of got, even though it's wood, it's kind of got this sort of metallic metal feel, and something a little unique for this project. Playing with the parallax to see if it did anything to the actual depth of it. You can see zoomed in, it's a really cool looking material, and the bump and the normal, everything looks really, really great. And you'll notice I keep going back to different views. So everyone kind of always has a money shot to their project as they're going through it. And so what I was doing there is just kind of checking all the money shots as I was going around. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add scattered vegetation. If you remember the very beginning when we built the site, I ended up doing the surrounding and the interior as two different materials, right? So the site itself is one material and the exterior is another. The reason I did that is exactly what you're seeing here. So now I have the ability to scatter vegetation along the edges of it, and then I can paint in on the inside to really make it look much cleaner. And so this gives me the ability to take advantage of tools within Twinmotion to quickly create what you're seeing here, which is a forest surrounding it. So all I'm doing is using the scattered vegetation tool, and I'm placing 3 or 4 of my favorite trees, and I'm just clicking a few times, and then I'm actually changing the size and the height of them. Another little tip when you're doing forests that surround your project especially is to make sure that you have sort of 3 layers, in my opinion, of foliage. You have a high one, a low one, and then a medium one. And so maybe bushes on the ground, sort of smaller trees in between, and high trees. And that helps break up the horizon and makes it look more like a forest. What I'm doing here is I'm actually using the vegetation paint tool, and I'm brushing in just with my mouse. I'm brushing in the sort of the medium level trees. And so I'm kind of brushing them in within the edges. I'm making it so it's not such a hard edge just by sort of brushing them in there. I can place them in different places if I want. And then I'm adjusting the size and the height. So this will help break up that tree line so it doesn't look like a straight edge, which is what I technically modeled in Revit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting that low edge that I was talking about. So I'm going to use some bushes, and I'm going to do a vegetation scatter and then probably a vegetation paint as well. So we have tall trees, medium trees, and then we're going to place some low ground cover to help really break everything up. So I'm going to use some ferns and some boxwoods maybe. I'm not really sure what I use here. Let's see. Yep, some ferns, some boxwoods. You can see all these hedges here. And I'm just going to do a vegetation scatter, and you'll see now it sort of covers that. So now when you're looking at it from the human perspective, what's happening here is it's sort of breaking up that whole thing, and it looks like a really dense, really large forest, which it actually is in real life. So it looks exactly what it is. And then I'm going to do the same thing with painting. So again, I'm going to paint this same low area. I'm just sort of paint it around the edges here. And now I have the ability to sort of freeform place these things all around. And this way it really helps sort of break up the edges. And you can see now it's starting to look like there's actually a forest behind my scene. No more photoshopping in forests behind your scenes if you don't need to. Now I'm going to start creating a couple images. So I'm just clicking and creating images of what the money shots are going to be. So what the renderings are going to be. And I'm applying just some simple parallelism. And this way now, when I start placing more objects within it, like maybe people, like individual trees, some rocks, I'm using these images, these focal points as my view. The other thing I'm doing is I'm turning on path tracing. So with path tracing on, it's actually the next step above real-time rendering. It is doing a form of ray tracing, of rendering. And so you'll notice one thing that I'm doing here is I'm adjusting my exposure and some of my sun settings based on path tracer. Luckily, this has been fixed quite a bit in the updated Twinmotion, but it used to be that a lot of your exposure levels got reversed when you would switch between real-time and path tracer. It's much better now, but if you do, you'll notice what I'm changing here are things like exposure and sun intensity to get the path tracing view, which is my image, to look similar to my real-time view. And you'll notice what's happening here is it's actually real-time rendering. It's actually ray tracing. It's ray tracing the scene. I'm going to create another camera angle of this elevation just by duplicating the view, moving it to a location, and then refreshing that one view. This way it keeps all the camera settings. So, unfortunately, I lost the video where I was placing in a few more of the details, like the grass, some people, some entourage within it for this specific phase of the project. So to give you an idea of what the final images look like, here's an example of a rendering and a few different renderings from that exact scene. Even though I lost those videos, I do have the further developed redesign of this project in Twinmotion. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because first, you can see the dramatic difference between the starting option of this project and where it ended up. but also how you can actually flip out and use a Twinmotion scene between two dramatically different options. And so if you remember in the very beginning of the video, I was talking about how this technology actually makes it very easy to make changes fast, mainly because it's real-time rendering, so you don't have to wait 4 days for the rendering, but also because you're building this world around your project and it's a flexible environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you now how I built the second option and introduce you to that second option, which is now a 2-story option with a loft. It's less of a Scandinavian modern approach and more of a just modern barn design. And a few other things, but you'll also start to see the entourage, like the people, the plants, the trees, the vegetation, the grass, all of the stuff that I built within the scene to really make the image what it is, and the real-time scene that I use when I present to the clients. So with that, let's jump into the more current version of the design of this modern barn in Twinmotion. Before we jump into Twinmotion, let's take a quick look at the more recent version of the project and the design, and so you guys can at least get a feeling for that, because it does shift dramatically. What you see here is a quick image of it before we jump into Revit and Twinmotion. You'll see that the barn now is more of a traditional barn with a little modern flair to it. It's got 2 stories now. There's a large open space for the workshop, which is a taller open space. Part of that is because the client wants to use it for recreational activities during the winter, such as basketball, so you need a little higher. Plus, he wanted to be able to add a more living room type hangout space on the first floor with a loft, and above it having an office accessible. So that's why it jumped up to 2 stories. And you'll see there's the lean-to is still there. There's a few features that are still there, but for the most part, it's taken a pretty dramatic twist. And so jump into Revit here. You'll see this is sort of the project as it is more like today. We've added some things like some brackets, some joinery. You'll see the lean-to is still there. There's a little roof over the garage entrance, and now here's our Twinmotion scene. So you'll notice I'm flipping between the old option and the new option quite a bit. And so part of that was to pull some of the materials out. Part of it was to modify some things, but it also is so you guys can see the dramatic difference between the two, but also how easy it is to reuse the scene. I didn't have to just throw the scene out. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually just applying materials. So I'm taking some of the materials from the original scene and I'm applying them to my new project, or the new version of the project, I should say. And I'm going to go around the project and I'm going to bring it in. So because this was a new model, I couldn't really refresh it. It was so dramatically different that I did have to reapply materials, unfortunately. Wasn't too big of a deal, but you can start to see the difference between the two as far as the scale, the size, the design, and so on and so forth. So here I'm just applying similar materials that you guys saw in the previous version. Quickly going through applying glass, the wood textures, the mullion textures. I'm just pulling some of them from the actual older model. A little tip there is if you press T on the keyboard, you do sort of an eyedropper. You can pick materials. Notice I have that nice vertical metal panel / wood looking thing. I'm going to apply a nice roof shingle here. Now that it's not the same continuous material, we need some sort of a roof on it. So again, just applying the material, scaling it up, changing the thickness, changing the color. And now you can see we got most of the stuff is in there. You'll see here I was just changing the light, going on the inside. You'll notice there's a car, there's a bunch of things in there. That's unfortunately some of the part that I missed, but those are all just Twinmotion library elements being placed in there. Same thing up on the desk here. So now look how easy it is to even move some of the stuff that was aligned with the older version, right? So I'm just taking some of these items from the Twinmotion scene and I'm just pulling them around. These are all just Twinmotion items that are built within the library. So now you can really see the difference between the size and the scale of all of this. There's our corrugated metal. This option had heavy timber. I'm going to do another video, not part of the series, but a separate video showing how I modeled all that heavy timber. The heavy timber was a no-go. We went through the whole rabbit hole of doing it. The pricing, the cost, everything wasn't up to what the client wanted. So we backed out of the heavy timber. Now we're going to talk about the foliage. So you'll notice some of the foliage disappeared now as I flip back between it. Part of that is because I refreshed the topography and some of the grass that was painted on disappeared. So a little tip here, if you want to, instead of doing vegetation scatter, what I did is I actually isolated only the grass material. So this is just showing the grass material. And by doing that, I can actually just paint blindly paint all on the surface, and it won't paint anything else. And so now I have the ability to go through it. The reason you want to do that is if you don't want to have grass everywhere, or if you want to have just certain areas of grass and be able to sort of paint it on without affecting the rest of it. And so you also notice that's how I added those dandelions, is I just painted the dandelions in, and I painted some stuff in between them. And now I'm just scrolling through these views and checking them out in Path Tracer to see how they look. So now you can see things like the different trees that were placed, the rocks that were placed in certain areas, even this tree overhang that's in that image. That's all there for a reason. It's to make shadows on the ground. It's to add composition to it, add some interest to it, but also add scale and let the clients feel that space, including this car and so on and so forth. So now I'm just going to go to my export. I'm going to select all of my views, and I'm going to export, which is basically just rendering these views as is, and you'll see the final images of this new option of this barn. So there you have it. There's the modern barn, taken from concept to modeling to Twinmotion for real-time rendering scenes and images, and ready to honestly present to the client. And so that's what we did. We presented this to the client. We got lots of feedback. We've gone back and forth, and we really started honing in on some of the design elements. Okay. Then the next step, after we've had those meetings, is going to be actually documenting this, right? Creating a set of documents for permit and construction. And so what you're going to see in the next video, the final episode of this mini series, is going to be me generating a set of permit documents or construction documents, whatever you want to call them at this point in time, from that process of going back and forth. So hopefully up to this point, you've enjoyed seeing my process, seeing this project unfold, and stick around for the next episode as we conclude it with this creation of construction documents in Revit using all of the stuff that we've already created. Okay, that's the key here, is that we're never throwing anything out. We're constantly developing our process and iterating through these models as we go through it. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel here. Thank you to Autodesk for supporting this series, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.